Good morning. So last night, part two of session five, Symbaroum, the Butcher of Blackmore, David running Todd, Dale, and myself. This was again another great session. We are attempting, due to orders by Rigel, to identify and stop murders in Blackmore. And of course, we're not necessarily detectives, but this is what we've been, in a way, asked to do by our sponsor, who's a goblin, a rich, successful, goblin in Blackmore. So we started out doing that, investigating the most recent murder, led us to understand a certain implement, a tool was used to perpetrate the murder. From there, Shig discovered that maybe goblins are to blame, and this was part one, and he comes to find us, and when he finds us, starting session two, he discovers that he's slinking back toward us while he listens as we are being set upon by black robes, and black robes are ultimately the Baron's police force. So the Baron, the tent city is temporary, and it's growing, and it's becoming very important to the Baron of this county that's allowed this to happen. And he has petitioned multiple times, and this is the lore of Symbaroum, has petitioned multiple times to allow for permanent Blackmore to become a permanent city, therefore permanent buildings, etc. And he's not been able to get that done through the political chains, right? Meanwhile, to police Blackmore, he employs mercenaries, which are blood robes, or blood cloaks. I can't remember exactly which. The point is, they are mercenaries, but they have the authority of the Baron, and therefore they are, in a way, the legal police force. But this particular guy, Haas, Haas, is a bit of a bully and a thug, and he likes to lord over the civilians and the peasants, etc. And we know him, and we've bumped into him, of course, in Blackmore before. He meets us in the street, and he says he has witnesses that say we are responsible for the murders. We go round and round, or not round and round, but Taro, my character, and he have a long conversation in which I ultimately I challenge him a little bit, but mostly I challenge that he's making a mistake. If you apprehend us based on these witnesses, you'll be made a fool, and it would be in your best interest to allow us to continue to conduct our investigations. And ultimately, if you have anything to share, it might help us, etc. I drew a symbol in the ground that he quickly erased. That made me think he knew more than he was willing to let on. Why he would erase the mud of the symbol I drew in the. He did tell us that that symbol can be found at the crypts, which is outside town in a burial, kind of like Boot Hill of Blackmore, right? If you think of Dodge City, where they bury all the people up outside of town in Boot Hill, it's kind of like but it's much larger than that. It's like a large cemetery. It's a legitimate burial ground with tombs and crypts, but it made me think, yeah, you bury those people up on the mountain out away from town, right? Especially in a place like Blackmore where there's lots of people just dying, I'm sure, of illness and whatever. Okay, so we decide meanwhile, Shig casts Witch Sight. He's getting dangerously close to suffering some permanent corruption, and he's cast Witch Sight, and he sees remnants of a little bit of this of corruption of the blood from the victims on Haas, somewhere on Haas. It emanates from him in general, but it's not necessarily details, like on his hands or whatever. So Shig is convinced Haas is the murderer, and he tells me this, and I said, well, let's go investigate. Cabela and I and Shig all agreed, let's go investigate the crypt first, and then we know where to find Haas. We can always come back to Blackmore and find us. Matter of fact, in 24 hours, he wants us to check in, and then he's going to take us into custody if we don't have the culprit in hand. So he'll find us. We don't have to find him. So we head up to the crypts, and as we approach the crypts, Shig's leading the way in kind of a hurry, and Shig gets there in a way slightly before us, and he spots two Karabadoc goblins of the more criminal element that are looting graves. And he approaches them and asks them, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this? And they challenge Shig. These two goblins challenge Shig. And um, it they basically threaten him with physical violence. And so Shig at this point unfurls his flail and says, fine, if that's the way you want to do this, that's the way we'll do it. Taro intersects one of the goblins and keeps him from getting into the melee with Shig. I want to allow Shig to teach this thug a lesson, and so I'm not going to allow them to team up on Shig. However, Taro has zero interest in their grave robbing. I don't really care how they make a living. I only want answers, and I'm here to look for the particular crypt with particular symbols. So my goal is to not necessarily kill these guys, and also I don't want to see them gang up on Shig, and then we have to kill these goblins. So Shig dispatches this clumsy, loudmouth goon pretty quickly, and he's able to get more information out of them about the crypt and about the fact that they're in cahoots with somebody, as they weren't paying their dues, so to speak. Some kind of contract arise why they're victims. So these goblins clearly are involved or know something of it. But anyway, that leads Shig, and then Cabello and I start to investigate one of the tombs that has the symbol. Shig gets up, comes running over, and says, "Why are we doing this? Why are we wasting our time? We know who the man is. It's Haas, and the goblin has confirmed as much. Basically, the goblin has confirmed this, that there is somebody else that's kind of giving them orders, failed contracts, so to speak. So against our better judgment, we say, okay, all right, but we have to have more evidence than your witch site. We have to find the weapon, the implement in which he kills with." Shig says, "What, you mean that dagger over there that's on the ground that's got the blood on it?" I'm like, "Well, okay, that's something, but that's not the implement. That's not the tool that was crushing skulls." But Shig grabs it up and says, "Fine, let's go." And so we begrudgingly, in a way, follow Shig back to Blackmore, to where we know Haas hangs out. The Dim Lantern is the name of the tavern, and it's packed, and there's plenty of jolly making. And we enter this inn/tavern, and we find Haas in the back corner of the table with 4 of his goons, and they're getting drunk and having a good time. And Shig says, "I'm going to sneak over there." He basically says, "Cabello, get their attention, keep their attention, so I can sneak over there and plant this dagger on Haas." So Shig, it's not just that it's evidence. Shig's going to actually plant the evidence on Haas. Cabello says, "I can oblige." He climbs up on the table and he starts to tell a story about the mighty Shig who brought down the troll, getting everybody's attention. Meanwhile, Shig is slimmering over there, and Taro is going to wait till Shig basically says it's on him, and then Taro is going to call him out in public and accuse him of being the murderer, and we can prove it because you've got evidence on you. Well, you can imagine how well it went, right? Shig felt miserably, drops the dagger at his feet. Haas stands up, back smacks, slaps Shig, and Taro then intervenes, ultimately to stop Haas. And as I intervene, I tell the other guards, back off. Your leader, your boss, is not only a thug and a thief and a criminal, but he's the murderer, and we have evidence. Well, Haas takes offense to this, and we end up in a melee. We very quickly bring Haas down. After we bring Haas down, I make a persuasion check, really against all odds, as I scream out to his henchmen, "You need to take this man into custody and take him back to the magistrate. Don't go down with Haas." And they've watched us just take Haas out in like 3 turns. So we make the persuasion check. They gather him up because we didn't kill him, but we left him laying there. Shig, he picks up the evidence dagger and gives it to the black robe, who sticks it in his robes. And on the way out, he looks at us and he basically says, "You better be right about this or you'll hang for it." And meanwhile, earlier in the day, on our way out of town, we spot witch hunters that were moving through town between tents. And out of the corner of my eye, I spot a female witch hunter is eyeballing us very closely. And 2 of her cohort step out, and we realize, okay, witch hunters are in Blackmore. This is what we didn't want. Shig is suffering some corruption, so he's heightened. we get up to, by the way, to the graveyard, and Shig he actually hits his threshold of corruption with another witch site check on the goblins. That's how he knows that this particular grave that they're robbing has this taint. And Shig, unfortunately, has some permanent corruption at that point, and he starts to grow a third eye in the middle of his forehead. And I see it as not quite formed yet. It's like this grotesque kind of, it's kind of there and it's kind of not there. It's almost like like an unformed eyeball that can't quite. That's how I see it in my imagination. So Shig has this third eye now that's permanent. Now, I think corruption, you can go and have rituals performed to reverse some corruption. So that may be a great session, right? Taking Shig to the barbarians to have a ritual performed to remove some of his corruption. I don't know. Anyway, long story short, these witch hunters, we've seen these witch hunters. Shig is on the border, and then Shig at the graveyard actually does suffer some permanent corruption, and he begins to sprout a third eye in his forehead. We follow him down to the tavern. You know, I try to confirm, Shig, are you sure about this? We end up apprehending Haas. Meanwhile, Shig is knocked off the table into the crowd of people who are fleeing the combat, and he gets lost among the people as the witch hunters then, as they haul Haas out, coming in the door are the witch hunters. And they look at me and say, where's the goblin? And I say, what goblin? And of course, they say, you know what goblin we're talking about, the corrupted goblin. We're here to stop corruption. And I said, I have no idea. He was here a minute ago. I don't know. Look about. I don't know. Meanwhile, they warn us that they are going to get him, and they're looking for him, and they will get him, as he is a corrupt creature, and they walk out. I then find Shig hiding in a barrel, and I tell Shig at the end, fade to black. I tell Shig, we've got trouble. Witch hunters are after you, and we fade to black. And that's how we concluded part 2 of session 5. We are going with our guts. Taro isn't convinced this is the murder, but he knows he's got a couple of problems. One, Shig does, and Shig suffers some corruption. So okay. 2, this guy's already threatened us that we're going to be taken in, and we're going to be tortured and punished for it, and probably executed for it. So I'm thinking I'd rather take it to Haas before he tries to take it to us. So I had another reason to go ahead and go along with this until we can hopefully find the real murder, right? I think in Taro's mind, he was thinking, well, this will at least buy us time with Haas to continue to look for the real culprit if we're wrong. And if we're right, shebang, we're right, and hallelujah. So that's how it ends, and it was great fun. And of course, Dale's going to run the next session, so Shig will be kind of, we'll have to have an interlude describing where Shig's been hiding or something from the witch hunters, and then of course I'll run the session after Dale. So Dale will be running the next session, which should include Taro, Malleus, hopefully Cabello, and who knows, maybe Justin again will join us with Dickamer, but we'll see. I'm enjoying it. Again, everything we do together as a group is fun and is fantastic. Symbaroum, for me, is a personal favorite. So of course, I'm really enjoying not only the company of my friends here, but also a game that I have a high affinity for and respect for, the original Symbaroum. Right? It's not just setting; it's the rules themselves. Right? It's how they're applied and how they're used, how you level up, all the stuff. So anyway, it's been great fun. And so that concluded part 2. Again, I don't have much reflections on this. It definitely were in character, which is great, which is fantastic. You know, Todd is in character. Shig, of course, Adele's always playing from the perspective of his character, and very little meta. We don't meta game much. We may understand certain things, but our characters, we try to play from our character's perspective. So Taro certainly was troubled. Twice I tried to confirm with Shig, are you sure about this? When we got in the tavern, I knelt down and looked him in the third eye, and I said, dude, are you sure about this? So, but at the same time, Taro's willing to apprehend him, because I know in a way he's ultimately going to apprehend us. So it's kind of like, well, if we can't avoid the sheriff, we'll blame the sheriff, kind of thing, and that's what we did. So great fun. And so I'm pretty certain this is not the culprit of the murders as a player, but Taro's kind of hoping. He's kind of hoping that Haas is, somewhere he's like, well, I don't think this guy's, but maybe he's part of it. Maybe he's part of the conspiracy to blame the goblins, and he's working for the guy who's the culprit. I mean, Haas may not be the murderer, but he might be in cahoots with the head honcho, as those Karabadak goblins were, right? So a very dynamic. Again, what's great about setting? What's great about using setting, whether it's written by your GM, your world building, or it's written by the books or whatever, when you buy in, the layers show up. And what I mean by that, the layers, we have a goblin. Shig is a goblin. Therefore, he's invested in ultimately how the goblins are perceived, and how the rest of the world might turn on the goblins. So there are these layers that influence how we should role play, but how our characters are in the world. So Taro, of course, is here to do a certain thing. He's here because he wants to become a legend. He wants his name to be sung and written about in poetry. But right now he's working for Rigel, and he's doing whatever Rigel has to say. He doesn't know what things are going to be sung in his lore, right? So right now, think of Taro as a young man who came to Blackmoor to make his way and to do what he does, but ultimately to be remembered, right? To become a myth, to become a legend. So, but again, as a young treasure hunting ranger, he's not quite certain how that's going to come about. So he does what he does, and he's loyal, of course, to his companions. And so I'm loyal to Shig, although I can see that Shig might be slightly deranged or irrational, right? But right now, Taro is going to trust his friend, right? And he's certainly going to trust that Shig has some powers that he doesn't have, right? So Taro's very aware. Taro's just a man, a mortal man, an Ambrian, a human. Shig has got witch sight, and he's performed rituals of fortune telling, and so Taro's aware that Shig may have some insight he doesn't have, and so we play it that way, and it's great fun. But my point is about buying in to the setting, buying into the world building. We understand who the blood robes are, what the realities of the blood robes, what witch hunters mean in the world. If you're not a witch or you're not corrupted, you're not too concerned about the witch hunters. They don't have any interest in you if you're not. But Shig, as loyal friends of Shig, witch hunters become our problem too. And this is what makes playing a setting that exists. And it doesn't have to be an IP, movie IP. It doesn't have to be Aliens or Predator or Blade Runner. It can be its own entity, like Symbaroum, or I can't think of a D&D setting, Neverwinter or Baldur's Gate, those settings or whatever, right, in the D&D universe. But when we have that and we all understand it, we all buy into it, it creates intrigue. It creates conflict. And that's the point of having those things, is it actually puts us in the fiction, and it makes the world relevant to our characters, and our characters ultimately relevant to the world. And these things are a little more important when we're playing games that are, I guess you could say, adventure, but also character-driven games. As opposed to, I suppose, old school, where we just roll them up 3 dice 6 straight down, roll 2 hit points, cross your fingers, and go out and try to survive and get some treasure and kill some evil monsters and get some experience points. And you find yourself sometimes not invested in the world, as invested in trying to survive the dungeon, or trying to survive the forest crawl, or trying to beat the goblins in the dungeon and collect what treasure you can. And right, whether it's a lark or you're serious about it or whatever, there is a definite effect of whether you invest in the world. Very often is affected by whether you're invested in the characters, and whether you're invested in the characters comes at a certain weight of character, the probability of characters contributing successfully and surviving to some degree. Now, I like lethal games. I want there to be risk reward. I want there to be trepidation, that things are dangerous and you better be careful whether you go in that door or that door. But my point is, you become more invested in the world when you recognize the characters have a little more weight as well, right? And I think it's a big deal. Now that happens over the course of time with campaigning in, say, old school Dungeons and Dragons, right? The old saying is, don't give me your background in old D&D, roll them up, tell me what you are, let's go play. We'll find out who you are as we play, because we have nothing invested in your background. You're not the prince of whatever, you're not the. And meanwhile, we do that because, well, you may be rolling up 16 characters before you know, by the time somebody is of irrelevant, right? It depends on the nature of the game. And this is why DCC exists. DCC, in a way, paid homage to the grind of early Dungeons and Dragons games, where you might have 4 or 5 characters die in 4 or 5 sessions, and then you're constantly. So DCC turned that into a very interesting mechanism, right? The funnel. We're gonna weed all these losers out through a funnel game, and you're gonna take 8, and by the time we're done, you'll have your guy, and now we can get started. We can be serious about this. And I think that's a very clever tool and mechanic to, in a way, simulate what it was like to play 8 sessions of D&D before you finally had a character who seemed to have what it took to be a survivor, right? And so it's not about what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, what's best and what's worst. This is about all these games created different play style. They created different experience at the table. And if you go into DCC understanding that, you're gonna enjoy DCC for what it is. If you go into 2D20 Conan understanding you're making characters that are a little more competent, they are a little more dangerous. They are probably going to survive a little longer, and you might even see one character go all 12 sessions to the end, or 20 sessions, or 40, whatever you're doing in Conan, right? And so as I age and as I invest myself in these games as both a GM and a player, I am looking for a little more survivability. And I'm looking for players to be invested in their character through background, not deep background. A simple background's fine. Farmer turned hunter, because, right? I don't care. It doesn't have to be a big deal. And I'm looking for their ability to invest in that and trust that they may or may not survive for a while, so they can begin to invest in the world and invest in the NPCs and invest in the things going on around them. And we start to have kind of continuous campaigns where characters have a chance to develop relationships with the party, and also we get to see these characters evolve, change, right? It's been great fun in Symbaroum to watch Shig. Shig has been the most dynamic because Shig has the most mechanical dynamic issues, right? Corruption is slowly affected Shig more than we've been affected thus far. But I think we're seeing Terrell, Terrell's personality arise, how loyal he is to his companions, but also, Terrell is clearly, in a way, determined to knock out these missions, as he's hoping at some point to make his myth his legend, right? And the only way to do that is action. So Terrell is less about talk and more about let's go get this done, because he doesn't know what's going to lead to the stories. This is all, it's going to all be the launching point for Taro's, that's just Taro's feeling about why he's here to do the things he does, right? And again, slowly learning about Cabello through simple dialogue and simple action, right? Todd, again, it all comes out through dialogue or action right there at the table, right? I think we're learning that as well. And of course, David's character, we've already learned quite a bit about David's character. So we are seeing these characters evolve. We are seeing the characters show up, but we're also seeing a little bit of arc and a little bit of progression. It's hard to do when we're also rotating GMs, which I've also found has been gloriously fun. It's really keeps the game on its toes. It keeps us all fresh. And it gives us all perspective. David gets to be GM for a couple of sessions and get perspective on Taro and Shig and Cabello. So when he's back as Malleus, right, he's got a pretty good angle on who these guys are. So David's not removed from the game. As a GM, he's still invested from his own character's perspective. And I think it's really enriched this little campaign. It really has. It's been fantastic. So anyway, that would be my reflections on what I'm seeing in our Symbaroum sessions, right? It is, I think the system is exactly what it says it is. It is exactly, there is no pretense there. This is Symbaroum, these are the mechanics, this is the world. It will do the things we say it'll do. If you play it, you play it the way it's written, etc., you're going to get this experience. If you make an effort to engage in the lore, in the setting, in the reality of it, and you're going to get that experience. Symbaroum doesn't fail at any level. I think it's completely successful across the board. And in the mechanics complement all of that. As a player-facing game, and this is the other thing, player-facing game just allows us all to know exactly what we need to do mechanically, right? David last night basically said, "You don't even need me in combat. You can do it." And that's kind of true, but it's not player-facing in the way that we are deciding the story. It's not player-facing in that we are writing the story. It's just player-facing that when combat comes, as long as we know who goes first and I know what I got to roll for it to hit me, and David's already said, "Hey, it's attacking you. Modify your defense up, +2." So now I modify your defense down 2. We know, ooh, this thing attacks pretty well, and then after it hits, it does a certain automatic amount of damage. And I think David was actually rolling damage, but in the book, it has a set number of damage and it has a set number of soak. So when I GM it, if it does 8 points of damage, it does 8 points of damage, and that's why the troll fight was so much more lethal, because it did 8 every time it landed a shot. So the only variable is whether Dell's armor soaked it or not, right? So, and again, the book does say you can vary the damage by rolling a d8 instead of the troll doing 8 points damage. But I like the fact that the beasts are set, so Dell pretty much knows on his turn when I say the beast swings a giant hand at you, he knows just roll his defense. And if he fails that roll, he knows that there's 8, he needs to soak it. And then so Dell should be able to do some of the administrative work right there with me. And it takes some load off the GM, and I can focus on just being the creature. And I can focus on what the creature is trying to achieve, or activate the creature's special abilities or skills or whatever, right? And I love it. I love it. So it's player facing in that the players get to do all the dice rolls and everything, but it's not player facing in that they're in control of the story or the narrative or anything like that. So anyway, that's my take. So these have been 2 great sessions, pretty much back to back, I think last week and this week. So, and technically we've completed session 5, but the mystery that this murderer has been dealt with, we won't know until we hear rumors of whether there's still bodies showing up, right? And it's one of those things as a group we haven't talked about as a GM. When I GM, do I go there? Do I say, okay, you've heard stories that there's more murders. Haas is on a rampage looking for Taro, and he's madder than hell that they had him arrested. We need to discuss as a group. But David, we don't want to also have spoilers. Is Haas the man? Is Haas not the man? So for Dell to run the game and give us a little bit of interlude as to what's happening in Blackmore, it might be important for us to know whether the murders are still occurring. Just something as simple as, yes, there's been another murder, therefore we all know Haas is innocent, right? But so those are the things we have to share as GMs. There's a little meta going on when all the GMs are passing the hat around. Like Rigel, they have to deal with the fact that I set us up in Blackmore with Rigel. That was kind of now it's a conceit the other GMs kind of use. They don't have to start every session with us dealing with Rigel, or they don't have to start us working for Rigel. Don't have to at all. But Rigel exists, and he's this thing, right? So we have a murderer in Blackmore. And so in Dell's session, it may or may not even be relevant to whether we've heard any more rumors or whether there's been more murders. My session, my goal is to get them into the deeper Davakar, so it'll be more of a traditional expedition treasure hunt hex crawl. Well, it'll be not so much a random hex crawl as it will be a deliberate hex crawl. They will still have to camp and bushwhack, etc., stuff like that. So again, therefore, they're going to be removed from Blackmore, so they may not know what's happening in Blackmore as far as, are there more murders going on? Has Haas been hung for it? Whatever. We don't know. So anyway, I can't wait to continue to play. Really digging Symbaroum, and I have decided what I'm going to run for my local group next week, and I'll talk more about that after the fact. All right.